Constantinople looked like certainty. In 1200, its walls rose above the sea like a promise, stone layered on stone, towers watching every approach, ships moving in and out of the Golden Horn with the rhythm of a city that believed it would last. Gold mosaics caught the daylight. Markets spilled into streets. Foreign tongues mixed with incense and smoke. But for most people living inside those walls, wealth was something you watched from a distance. The city could feel rich and still leave you exposed. A sudden rise in bread prices, a winter that lasted too long, a fever that did not pass, a day of work lost to a twisted ankle. In a place famous for luxury, safety was often a private possession, and the question beneath the marble in the markets was simple. What does the richest city in the world mean, if you can still fall through the cracks? Housing, living close to the edge. Most lives began and ended in crowded neighborhoods far from palaces and ceremonial avenues. Houses leaned into one another along narrow lanes. Upper rooms were dark, smoky, and shared. Families made privacy out of distance they didn't have. Beds close together, voices lowered, arguments postponed until the streets swallowed the sound. In winter, damp air pressed into walls and clothing. Heat came from small fires, charcoal braziers, shared ovens, anything that could turn cold into something bearable. But warmth had a price. Smoke irritated lungs. Flames wandered when people were tired, when children stumbled, when wind pushed through a crack in a shutter. A city built to impress the world still depended on ordinary roofs, ordinary beams, ordinary luck. A single spark could spread faster than a family could carry their possessions out. Over time, people stopped treating shelter as something permanent. They learned to live as if their home might not survive the season. Safety was temporary. Food, bread, prices, and quiet hunger. Constantinople lived on movement, grain ships, merchant cargo, taxes, storage, distribution. When the system worked, food arrived. When it hesitated, the city felt it immediately. Bread mattered more than luxury. Not because bread was romantic, but because it was measurable. You could hold it, count it, divide it, promise it. A loaf meant your children ate tonight. A missing loaf meant you began cutting tomorrow into smaller pieces. Markets were loud with bargaining, but anxiety was quieter. It lived in the way people watched scales, the way they memorized prices, the way they stayed near bakeries when rumors moved through the crowd. Ships delayed, supplies low, officials tightening control. In a rich city, hunger did not always look like starvation. Sometimes it looked like a mother buying less and saying nothing, a worker drinking water to fill the space where food should have been, a family stretching soup with more liquid than substance. And when prices rose, wealth didn't protect you unless it belonged to you. People learned to plan their lives around uncertainty, the way others planned around seasons. Hunger was familiar. Water, waste, and disease. The city's fame included its engineering, cisterns, fountains, aqueducts, systems that made Constantinople seem advanced, protected, civilized. But even well-built systems could not erase crowding. Thousands of bodies shared streets, baths, markets, workshops. Animals passed through the same lanes. Waste had to go somewhere. Water had to come from somewhere. And between those two facts, illness found room. A cough could move through a household like smoke. A fever could start in a crowded quarter and spread before anyone agreed what it was. People talked about bad air, imbalance, fate. They watched signs in the skin and eyes. They tried remedies, prayers, Warm baths, cold compresses, whatever had worked once. For the poor, illness was not only danger, it was interruption. You missed work, you lost pay, you fell behind on rent or food. The sickness itself might pass, but the damage stayed. Even in a city famous for its walls, nothing blocked disease. It arrived without siege engines. It entered through breath and touch. People learned to treat health as a temporary gift, not a guarantee. Death was routine. Work, wealth above, labor. The city's wealth had a sound. It was the clink of coin, the slam of warehouse doors, the creak of docks under cargo, the hiss of hot metal in workshops, the constant footfall of labor. Most people did not trade silk or negotiate shiploads of grain. They carried, they loaded, they stitched, they cleaned, they repaired. They hauled water, swept streets, transported goods through crowds that never fully cleared. Work was not just a livelihood. It was the thin line between stability and immediate decline. There was no buffer, no insurance, no paid rest. If you could not work, you became expensive to your own family. A broken finger could cost weeks. A twisted back could end a trade. A fall from a ladder could erase a household's future in a single afternoon. And because so many people competed for the same opportunities, a worker was replaceable long before he was exhausted. Someone else could always lift the basket. Someone else could always row the oar. Pain became something people carried quietly, the way they carried sacks. Not because they were brave, because they had no alternative. Injury meant replacement. Law and status, protection, with a price. Constantinople had law, courts, officials, punishments. It had paperwork and procedure, the appearance of order. But law was not the same as protection. Status shaped outcomes. Connections mattered. Wealth spoke clearly. A merchant with influence could resolve disputes faster than a laborer who arrived with nothing but a complaint. For the poor, justice was often distant and slow. It required time you could not afford and risks you could not manage. Accusing someone powerful could end your work. Challenging the wrong person could invite retaliation. Sometimes the safest choice was silence. Punishment, when it came, was meant to be seen. Authority needed visibility. Fear did part of the city's work. In a crowded world, control was not maintained by kindness. Even when the law existed, it did not always include you. People learned to read the city like a map of danger. Where to speak, where to bow, where to disappear. Protection had limits. Winter and the city's fragile comfort. Constantinople sat between climates and seas, and winter could turn beauty into pressure. Wind off the water cut through clothing. Rain made streets slick. Dampness sat in the bones. A rich household could buy warmth, better rooms, more fuel, more food. But the city's lower levels lived closer to exposure. Poorly sealed homes, thin garments, fires that could not burn long because fuel cost too much. Cold turned small problems into crises. A child's cough lasted longer. Food spoiled faster or became scarce. Work slowed in certain trades. The city felt less forgiving when daylight shortened. And still, people went out. They stood in lines. They carried water. They crossed the same muddy lanes and stone steps because survival did not pause for weather. In a famous capital, comfort was unevenly distributed. Winter made that visible. People learned to measure their lives in endurance, one day through the cold, then the next. Comfort was not promised. The pressure beneath the splendor. Constantinople's greatness was real. It wasn't a myth. It was built, defended, administered, taxed, supplied. The city functioned because systems held, most of the time. But ordinary life was lived under those systems, not above them. For many, survival depended on things they could not control. Shipments arriving on time, officials remaining stable, work remaining available, health remaining intact, weather remaining tolerable. The city's wealth could make it more impressive, but not necessarily safer. And gradually, people adapted. They learned to expect less, to keep their lives light enough to move, to value routines over dreams, to build meaning out of small certainties: warm bread, a shared meal, a child surviving the season, a day of work completed without injury. Before the conclusion, the truth becomes clearer. The city's greatness did not eliminate risk, it organized it. Wealth as a distance. Constantinople in 1200 was a symbol to the world, a capital of trade, a fortress of faith, a city with treasures that traveled in stories farther than most citizens ever could. Yet the ordinary person lived close to uncertainty. The system endured not because it protected everyone equally, but because it continued to function even when individuals failed. When one household collapsed, another filled the space. When one worker fell ill, another took the task. The city absorbed loss quietly, the way it absorbed smoke into stone. Wealth can strengthen walls. It can fill markets. It can decorate ceilings. But it cannot guarantee safety, not when survival depends on forces that remain indifferent to the people beneath them. And so the richest city in the world kept moving day after day, carried by ordinary lives learning to endure. In the end, what lasted was not comfort. It was adaptation.